talking about what makes you successful in life, relationships, and business. It's Jump, Pivot, and Roll with Shannon Stiles and Rachel Murphy.
And welcome to Jump, Pivot, and Roll. I'm Shannon Stiles.
And I'm Rachel Murphy.
You know, Rach, when I was younger, I had juvenile rheumatoid arthritis.
Yes.
And it was so bad that when I was 5 years old, I would crawl up the stairs crying because I was in such pain. And at some point in my life, I became shameful of that. In my mind, I became the sick girl. And, my family had to send me to Mayo Clinic. They would fly out. They would stay with me away from their jobs. It just wasn't a normal lifestyle because I was a sick girl. And I actually let that identify me.
You let the shame of it?
It became shame, yes. It identified me. Instead of feeling guilty because I had this illness. And, guilt is something that you feel it and you let go of it. Shame creates you. And you become that person. So I think it's really important today that we talk about guilt versus shame. Because if you do something and you hold it as shame, that's going to hold you prisoner. And when I was younger, I felt like I was a burden to everyone because I carried that shame.
What a terrible feeling that must have been.
I didn't realize it until I was older, but it was, know?
Well, I was looking up when we had kind of discussed what we were going to talk about. I was kind of looking up shame. And there are some certain behaviors that shame causes, and it's to blame others, to blame yourself, or to try to avoid it. And here's the really bad thing about that. Is that all three behaviors have self-blaming or low self-worth as a root cause. And they said that basically most people will latch onto one of those. And you latched onto blaming yourself for something that, let's be honest,
I had no control
you
over
had
it.
zip control over.
Yeah.
Zip.
So shame is an intensely painful feeling of being fundamentally flawed.
And what I find really interesting is that shame happens when we don't have self-acceptance. When we don't see what we're actually worth. And I want to share this with you, Shannon. I wrote this down, and our listeners, I wrote this down sometime back. But it says, self-acceptance is a beautiful thing. Knowing what you are, who you are, and where you want to go with your life. That's a life intended. My flaws, my failures, my disappointments are all part of my growth. Of doing more, becoming more, achieving more. A life worth living is all of this. It's acceptance of the journey and all that it entails as you get there. The thorns, the falls, the scrapes and the bruises. It's the tears, the laughter, and the joy. It is the lives you touch and the lives that touch you. And so, I think shame says that we can't fail, right? Shame says that we can't be flawed.
Shame says we are a failure. We are flawed.
But allowing that to own you,
that's what that does.
That's what that does, right? And so here you are, 5, like a kindergartner, in absolutely horrible physical pain. And you take on yourself the fact that your family's trying to help you get better as something you chose? Is that what I'm understanding you to say?
No, it's So instead of realizing that I had an illness and it set my family back a little bit and just accepting that as a fact, it became my identity. And I was a burden on my family, not the illness. It wasn't the illness.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Burden.
You're owning it.
Me.
You're owning it. You're
that's
saying
the
this
difference
is
between
me.
shame and guilt is, with guilt, you recognize that, let's say that someone's involved in a car wreck and they had a couple of drinks before they got in the car.
Okay.
And they hit somebody and they kill that other person.
Oh, Lord.
And they feel horrible about it. But they're able to move on with their life and make better choices in the future and
hopefully pay their price.
Yeah, exactly. But, they help others. And, I mean, a lot of drunk drivers join organizations that help with that after they've done it. That's a feeling of guilt which you truly are remorseful. But it doesn't identify you and it doesn't take you as a prisoner, hold you prisoner. Shame is you hit someone and, I have a nephew, well, 2 nephews, they're twins. Not my sister's twins. It's my sister-in-law's nephew. Which
Okay.
I consider them my nephews. But when they were younger, they were involved in a car wreck and could have been some extra activities going on, right? But one of their friends didn't make it.
Oh, wow.
And it defined their life. I mean, the trajectory of their life, the shame that they felt, they carried for probably 20 years. Well, maybe less than that because they're still young. But, I mean, they weren't able to realize it wasn't a guilt thing. It was a shame. And shame's something that you carry for life unless you can recognize it. And once you can recognize it as being shame, then you're able to do something about it. Then you're able to realize, you know what? It wasn't me as a person that was a burden. It was that illness that I had that was a burden, right? That's guilt. Guilt is when you can feel and release. Shame is when you feel and it becomes you.
Well, and that's why I said self-acceptance is so important, because with that self-acceptance, it says all of these things are going to be part of my journey. The failures, I tried and I failed. What should I do now? Good for you. Hallelujah. You tried.
Yeah.
You went out there, you gave it your best shot, and you failed. Celebrate.
Exactly.
Because you learned something in that journey. Either maybe A, that wasn't the right choice for you. B, you need to be more educated. Or C, you learn something that when you start again, this time you're not going to make that mistake.
See, the older I get and the wiser I get, I realize that in that scenario, it's not a failure.
No.
Because you didn't fail, you just learned why it didn't work, right?
That's exactly
or you
it.
learned a way that didn't work.
Right.
Failure to me is when you don't even try.
Exactly. And I think that that's what shame does. Shame says, well, you never even should have given it a thought. What were you thinking? Why would you be good enough to go out and do X, Y, Z? Right? I think a lot of people, and probably even a lot of our listeners, want to do something different. They want to start a business. They want to do something they love. They want to live with more passion. But somewhere in the beginning, they stepped out, right?
Mm-hmm.
They went off the high dive and they jumped and they belly flopped. And that shame attached itself to them to where they don't believe that they can go out there and do something more. And that's where realizing that failures are not failures. They are just another step in the journey. And to me, that's where shame stops owning you. Would you agree?
I do. And, so while you were talking, it reminded me of a story about this little girl that she was really, really young, and she loved to sing, and she would run around the house just singing and singing and singing.
Is this you, Shannon?
And no, it isn't me. I've got a story about me too and singing, and it became a shame story. Actually, that'd be a good story to share. But she would go around just singing, and then one day her mom had a bad day, and she was a little bit stressed, and her daughter was singing and she couldn't concentrate and she couldn't focus, and she said, "Shut up! Your voice is horrible. Shut up." That little girl did not sing again until when she was an adult, because she was passionate about it. And when she was an adult, somebody heard her singing and was like, "You have the most beautiful voice." And she just broke down to tears because she always thought it became her. She thought that her voice, period, she wouldn't even talk very much because she thought her voice was horrible. And here's my story. So when I was 12 years old,
okay,
I went to Worlds of Fun, and I was there with my sister, and my sister's 4 years older than I am. And at 12 years old, your voice is kind of changing, and you're going through an odd time, right?
You are, yes.
And at the time, Worlds of Fun, it's an amusement park in Kansas, and they had this studio where you could go in and you could record songs.
Yes, I remember that.
So I go in and I record Jesse's Girl.
Oh.
And it was bad. It was really bad. My voice cracks, and it was pitchy. It was bad, right? I was a young girl. Well, my sister, for the majority of my life, anytime I would get a boyfriend that would come over, she'd pull out that tape and play it for him.
Oh, no.
And I love singing. My husband says, "You're pretty good at church." He's like, "Honey, that sounds really good. You did a great job." But I would never sing. The only time I sing is when I'm worshiping God, because I know God doesn't care. I know God thinks my voice is beautiful. But that's an example of shame. My voice is horrible is what I became. Instead of realizing I was a kid, I was going through puberty, right? And so many times we do this, and it becomes our identity. And I think it's really important that we're able to identify this, because until we can identify it, we can't change it.
That is a great point. And I kind of have my own story. So I remember being a teenager, and I was looking in the mirror because we were getting ready to go out. And I wasn't a very confident teenager by any means. I was a bit of a nerd. And you know what? I like nerds, so I'm okay with that
Nothing wrong
now.
with nerds.
But I didn't like it necessarily back then. And I remember I was at a good friend's house, and she had said to me, "Man, your nose is big." Now, I had never noticed my nose before, ever. I'd never disliked my nose. I'd never loved my nose. I had just never noticed my nose.
Right.
I am 50 years old now, and I still notice my nose. Now, honestly, do you think I have a big nose?
No, not
for
at
my
all.
face,
Your nose is like my nose.
Yeah,
I'll
I
show
think.
the listeners.
Yeah, there
I
you
have
go.
a Polish nose.
Well, maybe I have some Polish in me. But, I remember when that was said to me, that all of a sudden I felt like I had a
Pinocchio.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
And it's almost like when someone mentions a zit and you don't really see it, and then all you see is your face is this giant zit. And that became something, I'm going to love me for who I am, because that's how God made me, and that's the nose he gave me, and, so be it. But I will tell you, for years and years, I would worry about how it looked in photos. I would think about, how do I change it? Should I go and get cosmetic surgery? I was going to look into letting somebody cut my face because one person made a comment about my nose. And but it's one of those things that what I want to point out is that other people's labels can cause us shame. Like what your sister did
seeds that are planted.
Was crap.
It's the seeds that are planted that if you water them, they will grow.
Yeah.
And we can't help. Here's the thing I want people to understand is we can't help completely people planting negative seeds.
Right.
Now, there are a lot of things we can do. We can limit the time we spend with negative individuals, right?
Absolutely.
But if we're talking about family member or a close friend that it's just an off remark that they make, we can't really help no seeds being planted. But what we can help is watering those seeds.
Right.
Just because somebody dumps a seed into our mind, we do not have to water it. It doesn't have to grow. But we can only have that control because so many times our subconscious takes care of this. We can only have that control when we monitor and when you use the word intentional earlier, when we're intentional about what we allow to grow.
Exactly. And when, again, and I keep using this word, but guys, I love the word self-acceptance because it doesn't mean that everything about me is perfect, and it doesn't mean that everything about me is beautiful and there's nothing to change and I'm just perfection personified. What it means is that I see all of me, the zits, the big nose, the flawed things, the failures, everything that I haven't accomplished, along with everything that I have, and I say, this is what makes me me. This is my journey, and it's okay because it's all part of the journey.
You're right. And we're going to take our break for a word from our sponsors. You're listening to Jump, Pivot, and Roll. Don't go anywhere because when we come back, we're going to really dive into guilt versus shame, and it's going to be about in the workplace.
Ooh.
We'll be back in just a moment.
The Jump, Pivot, and Roll podcast is brought to you in part by the Shannon Styles Allstate Insurance Agency. Just as you take that next step in life, you need to take that next step in protecting yourself, your car, your home, and your family. Reach out to Shannon at 316-773-9864 or shoot her an email at sstyles@allstate.com. Also by Simplify My Life ICT. Is your life cluttered? Do you need help with organization? Rachel Murphy can help. Check out Rachel's services online at simplifymylifeict.com or reach out to Rachel at simplifymylifeict@gmail.com. To keep up with the Jump, Pivot, and Roll podcast, make sure to follow them on their Facebook page. Just go to facebook.com/Jump, Pivot, and Roll. There you can find content, podcasts of the show, discussions with Rachel and Shannon, and more. Plus, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on any of your favorite podcasting sites, from iTunes and Spotify, Google Play to TuneIn, and right on their Podbean site at jumppivotandroll.podbean.com. And for all the exclusive content, make sure to become a VIP member on their Patreon site. Just go to patreon.com/Jump, Pivot, and Roll.
Welcome back to Jump, Pivot, and Roll. I'm Shannon Styles.
And I'm Rachel Murphy.
And we're talking about guilt versus shame. And before we went on break, I said that we're going to talk about guilt versus shame in the workplace. But I did want to bring up a statistic. I'm an analytical girl. I love stats. So you'll hear me a lot of time bringing up statistics. And when it comes to guilt, helpful guilt, this is a healthy type of guilt. We can experience guilt as early as age 3 to 6.
Ooh, that's awful early.
Unhelpful guilt, unhealthy guilt, we can experience guilt as early as age 3 to 6. Shame, the worst of all, right? Shame, we can experience shame as early as 15 months.
What?
That's why shame is more deeply wired in our brain, and it's more difficult to reverse it. So it is so important for us to be able to acknowledge the difference between shame and guilt. And once you can acknowledge the difference, it's not hard to change shame into guilt and into a helpful guilt, right? But you have to be able to recognize that.
Well, yeah, I mean, having guilt is not a bad thing. It helps you to grow. It helps you to make amends. It helps you to do all of those things. But to carry around shame debilitates you.
Yeah. So the National Institute for the Clinical Application of Behavioral Medicine says that potentially positive results of guilt could be healthy guilt allows us to seek forgiveness and correct a wrong, and it can lead to healing. Negative guilt, and we're not talking about shame yet, negative guilt is the unhealthy guilt that leads us to emphasize self-punishment over behavior change, trapping us into the guilt, right? But shame causes us to fear that we will be rejected. So it tempts us to disconnect from others and avoid what causes us shame. It could even start us down a path of deeper mental health problems like depression and substance abuse. So I also want to talk about what they say as far as how to resolve it, right?
Of course.
Because that's the key to jump, pivot, and roll.
Absolutely. It's about not only recognizing the behavior, but steps to change the behavior.
So with healthy guilt resolves as we repair the damage we caused, right? So, I mean, it could be something as simple as a little kid that, you're in the grocery store line and they pick up a pack of gum and they actually steal it. And you realize that when you get in the car, well, a healthy way to do it is acknowledge that they stole it when they feel guilty, walk back in with them and have them say, I took this without paying for it, right?
I still have that memory of when I was a child, and it was Lifesavers. And I remember sitting in the back seat, and I am just happy with my little pack of Lifesavers. And I'm chomping on them, and my mom looks in the rearview mirror, and she says, Rachel, where did you get those? And I remember hiding them back behind my back as if the mouthful of Lifesavers wasn't evidence enough. And she said, where did you get those? And I said, from the store. And she turned around, and this was in Texas at the Piggly Wiggly. Isn't that a name for a store?
I love Piggly Wigglies.
Yeah. And walked me back in and asked for the manager. And I stood there with still, Lifesaver goo on my face because I was eating them really fast. And I remember the manager bending down at my level, and I said, I am so sorry. I took these and I ate these, and they weren't mine, and I gave them back. And the manager was so very nice, but she didn't excuse my behavior.
Yeah.
She said, you shouldn't have done that, right? And I said, yes. And she said, and you're not ever going to steal again, right? And I said, yes. And guess what? That was a life lesson. Now, my mom could have taken me home and shamed me and called me names and ridiculed me and busted my butt and all of that. But instead, she let my guilt teach me a valuable lesson.
Now, you could have walked out of there and you could have carried that guilt with you, right? And you could have not learned the lesson immediately and carried the guilt with you, and that would be unhealthy guilt.
Yeah.
And unhealthy guilt remains until we correct the irrational beliefs. So we have to face these, right?
We do.
We have to face these. We did a show with my husband, and he talked about his guilt.
Yes.
And it's kind of borderline shame and unhealthy
There's
guilt.
a lot of shame.
Yeah. And that's something he'll have to address. But in order to address and resolve shame is internalized and deeply connected to our sense of who we are, which makes it more difficult to resolve.
Right.
So you can exercise self-compassion to shift feelings of shame and move awareness away from self-criticism or proof of inadequacy and pursue relationships, nurture connections, and sense of belonging with others.
Again, it's self-acceptance of knowing that this is part of the journey and you're going to make mistakes. I was a little girl. The Lifesavers looked great. I wanted them. I didn't even ask my mom to buy them. I just, hey, they're here, and took them.
Yeah.
But that was a life lesson for me. And I'm grateful
it taught you
for
you
it.
have to pay for what you take.
Exactly.
That was a great lesson.
It was a great lesson, but it was also a great lesson in the way, and thank you, Mama, for the way she handled it, because she didn't label me a thief.
Yes.
She didn't say, there's nothing good about you, nothing. She took that opportunity to take that action and turn it into a lesson. And I think that's what we want our listeners to do. If there's something that you are beating yourself up about over and over and over again, or something that somebody else is beating you up about over and over again in the workplace, in your business, in your personal life, we want you to get past that shame and accept the guilt, but then accept the self-acceptance.
I think a lot of times, Rachel, it's not others that are doing it, it's ourselves. We're the ones that carry it. We're the ones that are beating ourselves up.
Yes and no, and here would be my example.
My parents did not say you're a burden on me.
No, they didn't.
I did it.
Well, yes, but let's take your sister again,
Okay.
right? And the tape. She did that to humiliate you. She didn't do that for any other reason than to make herself feel better about the fact that you
Maybe.
were bringing a boy home. There's purpose in why she did it. And
I don't think she realized. I think she thought she was being funny.
Okay.
And it was at my expense.
And you know what? That's not funny. When you're
Right.
doing something mean at somebody else's expense,
Right.
that's not funny. That's mean. And I know you love your sister, but I'm going to call it what it is. It's mean.
Yeah.
And because of that, you were not singing. You were not doing something you loved. That was
To
shame.
this day, I still won't sing at karaoke. That's one that I'll sing to God. I don't know. That's going to take me a long time to get over
Gonna
that.
take her
because,
some apple caramel
well,
martinis.
you know what the problem is that you don't do it and then you become bad, right?
Right.
I mean, had I loved singing and I kept doing it and I got better and better and better, that would have been a different story. But my head said, you suck, so I never tried and I always sucked, right? I stayed there. And it happens a lot of times in the workplace. So especially I've noticed it with sales positions because you have goals, right? But it can be any position. But you have goals, and if you don't reach your goal, a lot of times if your team has a goal as a team goal, you're going to feel guilty because you were the one that maybe the only one that didn't make their goal and you made the team not make their goal, right? So in a healthy situation, that's good to have that guilt because
If you didn't
other
do
people,
all that you could
Yes.
have.
Guilt can be a great thing. It can be a positive thing because then if you can recognize it, you can change it, right?
Right.
Unhealthy guilt is feeling like, well, I'm never going to be,
Yeah, I suck.
I don't have the good tools,
I
right?
suck.
Shame is going to be, I am not a salesperson. I can't sell anything. I mean, it is me.
It's
You know?
internal. Right.
Yeah, it is just deep in your body. And everyone's a salesman. I mean, if you're married, you had to sell yourself, right?
Absolutely.
If you're dating someone, you had to sell yourself.
If you're owning a business and you're running it, you're selling. If you're going to networking meetings,
yes,
you're selling.
Yes. And so it's very, very important to recognize the difference. I keep repeating myself, right? Once you recognize it, you can do something about it and you can change it. And the reason I keep repeating myself is because sometimes it takes a couple of times. It's just like that kid that you tell them, and then they hear it for the 12th time and they go, oh, that makes sense.
Or they hear it from somebody else, and all of a sudden it's the wisest information in the world.
Yeah.
Not speaking to you kids, not at all.
But that's why I'm repeating myself, is because that is key.
Right.
When it comes to guilt versus shame, that is key.
Absolutely.
Recognize those seeds being planted. Recognize what you're planting yourself,
Or feeding.
It's not always somebody else.
Yeah. Things that we feed grow.
Yes.
Things that we look at healthy and realistically, it can change it. So again, let's take my nose, okay? I had a couple of options, right? Love my nose, accept it, or go pay to have some person cut on my face. I decided it was good enough of a nose. It's the nose God gave me, and I'm going to accept it. I kind of like my nose now. It's part
beautiful.
Of me. Thank you. But
I don't even recognize your nose when I look at you. I'm a nice person.
Yeah, I'm a nice person too. And smiles. I love smiles. Yeah. But, it's just, I finally got to a point to where I said, I'm not going to hate the nose on my face anymore. And I recognized it. And, I remember standing in front of the mirror looking at it on the day that I kind of decided I was going to stop beating myself up about my nose. And I looked at it realistically, and I looked at it from the side and this side. And I'm like, it's really not that big of a nose for my face. So I took somebody else's outside opinion and looked at it from my point of view and seen that there really wasn't anything that wrong with it.
So I want to reverse the situation.
Okay.
And I want to ask our listeners, have you ever been in a position where you have planted the seed?
Oh, that's a good thought.
Good because point. Yes, we have to be accountable for the seeds that we allow others to plant into us. But I think that it's our duty to be more accountable for seeds we plant.
Absolutely.
It's easy to do, especially if you're a parent. I mean, I look back and I'll tell you, the seed I planted with my son was perfectionism. And oh my gosh, I send him messages all the time saying, honey, I'm really sorry that I didn't accept you for who you were when you were younger. Because, if he would come home with 4 A's and a C, it wasn't the A's I looked at.
You were looking at that C. What did you not do?
And I did it so often that he wasn't guilty. He was shameful. I mean, he carried that around like he was just worthless. And that was on me. I put that there. So I really, in order for us to grow and to be better individuals, I believe it's very important that we pause before we speak. And I am guilty of, just last week, I didn't pause before I spoke to you. And I feel bad about that. Wish I could have done it differently. Next time I will, right?
Well, and that's the important thing, Shannon, is we look in the way that we can do it. I mean, I think you bring up a great point. As a mother with 4 kids, I look back on a lot of the things that I did as a mom that I am not proud of. things I said, expectations I held, things I put on my kids' shoulders that they really didn't deserve, because it wasn't really about them. It was about how they looked to others, so I would look good to others. Major regret. But here's the difference in that, is that for a long time that was my shame, and it owned me, and I felt like I failed my kids. Now, I will tell you, I did not do everything right.
Yeah.
And there are things,
if
I could, I would change them. But that is my guilt. I do not think I was a worthless mom. Every night I went to bed praying for my kids, and every morning that I woke up, my life was about my kids. So I did good as a mother. There are many wonderful things I see in my children doing today, and I'm like, they learned that from me.
Yeah.
So that's the difference between guilt and shame, and I think it's so important, especially as moms and women, that we recognize
so
that.
when Parker was in the hospital and tried to take his life, I had both sides of this. I had people planting the seed and me planting the seed of shame. I had someone pull me aside and say, basically, I wasn't a good mom. And that's why Parker was there. And I was telling myself I was a worthless mom. And my son was about to die because of my parenting. Now, give me just a second so that I can kind of get the shakiness out of my voice here. That wasn't true.
Not at all.
That wasn't true at all. You know, I could feel guilty for some things that I've done, right? I do feel guilty because I did put that perfectionism, that goal for perfectionism in him. And, you know, unfortunately, it made him feel like he wasn't enough, and he chose to do that. However, I was also a damn good mom.
Yes, you were.
I was a single mother, and I was traveling with him on his competitive sports teams. And, you know, that's the key of once you realize you're stuck in shame, you can change it to guilt by pointing out all these great things that you did.
You're the mom who, when money was tight, was counting the chicken nuggets to make sure your child had enough.
I was the one that wasn't eating so that he had plenty, right?
Exactly.
And I'm proud of those moments.
You should be.
I'm proud of, you know, I was the mom that drove 38 miles, 40 miles to get sugar cubes in order to make pyramids for a last minute school project, right? We couldn't find it, and we couldn't find enough sugar cubes, so we had to drive all over the city to find them. Those are a part of the mom that I was. Yes, there were bad parts of me. Yes, there were moments where my anger got me, and I said things I wish I could have taken back. But we can't let that become our identity as a parent.
Exactly. And so we really want to say to our listeners, if this is where you're at, if you are beating yourself up because of things that you regret, it's okay to have the regret. It's okay to want to do things differently, which leads you to doing things differently. But it's not okay to live in shame. Even if you've made a lot of really bad mistakes, bad choices in the men you pick, bad choices in business, bad choices in finance, look at how you can use those things to move you forward, and don't get stuck in the unhealthy shame, and definitely not the guilt that keeps you stuck there. Look at how to turn it around.
And I've got a recommendation for how to turn it down. For every shameful event that you uncover, I want you to take that and write it down and physically change it to a guilt, right? But for every one negative, I want you to write 10 positives.
Oh, I like that challenge, Shannon.
Because then you'll be able to look and you'll be able to see, okay, this doesn't define me. It was a bad moment. It was a bad choice, right? But without those 10 to compare it to, you're not going to be able to get out of the shame habit.
Absolutely. And you know, I want to go back to your first story about the little girl who was singing. Yeah. And the mother had a bad day and screamed something. Do you think if she found out how she truly affected her entire life, that would not just blow her away?
She'd probably be stuck in shame.
Yes. So no more sticking yourself in the shame corner.
No more shame.
Get out of the corner, listeners.
Let's look at it all not as shame or guilt. Let's look at it all as a learning lesson, right?
Right.
So life doesn't always come with directions. Sometimes you have to jump, pivot, and roll. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please subscribe, share it, and leave us your thoughts. Until next time, thanks for listening.
Thanks, guys.